Hello, this is Gallifreyan Jedi, and I would like to welcome you to my YouTube channel. And for today's blog, I would like to review my personal top 10 favorite classic Doctor Who stories. Now, I'm going to be talking about Doctor Who, but it's going to be the classic series, not the new series. So I won't be including any episodes or any stories from the new series, which started in 2005. With Christopher Eccleston going all the way up now currently to Peter Capaldi for Series 8 of Doctor Who. And it's not because none of those stories are my favorites. I don't think that are any good. It's just that I want to focus on the classic Doctor Who series, which ran consecutively for 26 years. From 1963, starting with William Hartnell, and ending in 1989 with Sylvester McCoy as the 7th Doctor. So it ran for 26 consecutive years, and the classic series is still my favorite series. Not that I don't like the new series. I do like the new series, and maybe in a future blog I'll do my favorite episodes from the new series. But for now, I want to focus on the classic series, which I really love. I mean, the classic series is what got me hooked when I was growing up as a teenager, and it's still my favorite. I would give the new series, if you're going to say 1 out of 5 stars, I would give it a 4. But the classic series, I would definitely give a 5. And I don't want to make this a contrast on what's better between the classic series and the new series. But I know that probably the younger generation appreciates the special effects and the action and the visual content of the new series more than they appreciate the old series. But I'm still a huge fan of the classic series. I still like the new series. I do like the new series, but I'm still a huge fan of the classic series. I think that the stories are more complex, even though it doesn't have the special effects or the visual content because of the low budget and the lack of technology, computer technology. It is still the best as far as storytelling, the continuity, the connections with all the stories, and stuff like that. I really think that holds up better and holds up really better than even the new series. And I love the classic series because I feel the classic series is more hardcore science fiction stories compared to the new series, which is still science fiction, but yet has, in my opinion, my personal opinion, has a lot of overtones of mysticism and things that would be more in the fantasy realm than science fiction. But that's just my personal opinion. It's not something I'm going to try to put down. The new series, I do like the new series, but the classic series that ran from 1963 to 1989, the 26 consecutive years, that is the hardcore. That's what I'm really passionate about. So that's why I want to focus on today. And because I've watched throughout my youth, throughout my teenage years, 1980s, when I really got into Doctor Who, and I was going to the Doctor Who conventions, and it was really unknown. It was unlike today, the new series, which is very popularly known throughout America. The classic series was not really known. It was a cult favorite. It had a following, but for the majority of Americans, nobody heard of it, And for the few who did know of it in my family and among people that I know, classmates I went to school with, my family, I got laughed a lot because it had cheesy effects and they thought I was watching something stupid and simple. But yet alone, nevertheless, I think that quite to the contrary, it was a gem. It's probably one of the best things they had for television at that time, even though it was never played on any of the major networks. The classic Doctor Who series was never played on any of the major or minor syndicated networks as well, which have commercials. It was only played solely on PBS stations. For us around here, it was WHYY Channel 12, and then New Jersey Network Channel 23. Those were the two stations I watched them on here in South Jersey. But they were on basically public television, exclusively public television, and I watched them every Friday night, look forward to that every Friday night, and Saturday afternoon, watching a Doctor Who story. So that's what I want to, I've seen all the stories that they had from those years, my teenage years back in the 1980s. I've seen all for all the ones that they brought over here, except for the ones from William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton, which were considered still the part of the Lost Mission, the Lost episodes. But I've seen all the Doctor Who stories that they brought over here during those years. So that's what I want to focus on today, is to talk about my top 10 favorite Doctor Who stories. And this was a very, very hard decision, creating the notes for this blog, because to settle on just 10 stories, I mean, it's hard enough. It's not like these 10 stories were great and all the other ones were mediocre. All of them were great. I think all of them were great, all the way up to Sylvester McCoy was probably the first Doctor, the seventh Doctor, getting closer to 1988, 1989, when the classic series had ended. That's when in my opinion, that's where some of the stories started to go downhill. But as far as, if you're talking from William Hartnell all the way up through Colin Baker, every single story was great. Every single story. I don't think there was any Doctor Who stories from William Hartnell all the way to Colin Baker, the Sixth Doctor, in 1985, or actually 1986, when he was last appeared as the Doctor. I don't think any of those stories are mediocre. I think they're all great, so that's why I say it was very hard to succinct them down to 10 stories that were my favorite, because I love them all. I love all the stories. But I had to really seriously think about this critically and think to myself, what are the stories that I really appreciate, that really captivated me the most? Not to say that the others were mediocre, because like I said, I loved all the stories, but which ones really tapped my imagination and my interest the most and captivated me the most? So I did make this list. It was, like I said, it was a very hard decision, but I did make this list. And I would like to give you this list and tell you what these stories were about and why I like them. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to categorize them. I'm going to go through the list of them, and they're not a list in the sense of what I like best. They're not listed according to what I like best, like this is number 1 is what I like best, number 10 is what I like least. I didn't list them that way. I list them in the chronological order that they came in. So it's not like from best to worst or best to least or whatever. It's basically the chronological order of the stories which they take place in chronology, the episode chronology, and story chronology of Doctor Who, of the classic Doctor Who series. Now, just to explain something to you, because I'm going to be categorizing them and I'm going to be giving some details, which some of you who are not familiar with the classic Doctor Who stories, this will be helpful. As you know, the new Doctor Who series, which they're doing in England right now, are very similar. They do it very similar to how American television shows been doing since time immemorial. Usually a television show will have, it's either half hour or an hour in length, and usually the story, or the main story for that episode, will be concluded within that episode. So you have a story per episode. It's a half an hour or an hour in length. And pretty much the new Doctor Who series follows that, like I said, very similar to majority of American television shows, how they have been doing it since the last 5 decades on American television. But not so with the classic Doctor Who series. How the classic Doctor Who series ran is you would have a story. You have a Doctor Who story, but that story wouldn't be started and concluded in one episode. It would be serialized. That means you would have one Doctor Who story, and each episode would be a half hour in length, and it would be comprised of, the story would be comprised of anywhere from an average 4 to 6 episodes. That was the average There was times in Doctor Who series where it was as short as 2 episodes, and then there was a very rare occasion, but you have something like the War Games, which was like 10 episodes, which was the last one for Patrick Troughton. But that's how the Doctor Who episodes ran. So that's what when I talk about a Doctor Who story, I'm not talking about the episode itself. I'm talking about the story. So you would have a particular story of Doctor Who, and if it ran from 4 to 6 episodes, and it would be serialized. So each episode, the first episode of that story would start the story. Then at half an hour, each half hour, and the end of each episode of each half-hour episode, it would end with a cliffhanger, sort of like the classic Buck Rogers. As the old serials that you get from the 30s with Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, with Buster Crabbe. If you're familiar with that, where it would show you 15-20 minutes of a story, then end on a cliffhanger, and then you would have to come back next week to pick up to find out if your hero survives and how he survives. Well, essentially that's how the Doctor Who. It would typically a Doctor Who story would start with episode 1. And then it would end at the end of each half-hour cliffhanger, maybe with the Doctor looking like the Doctor's going to get killed. And then you would wait for next week to tune in for the next episode to find out how he gets out of that situation. And usually that story would run from 4 episodes on average. And some episodes are 6 episodes. Some stories are 6 episodes. And then essentially it would conclude at the end of 4 to 6 episodes. Then it would conclude that story, finish that story. Then it would go on to the next story, and then that story would be serialized. That's how the classic Doctor Who that's how the classic Doctor Who series ran for its 26 years. I really like that. I really like that method, even over the new method, how the new Doctor Who series runs. Very similar to the American television. But I like how the classic Doctor Who series ran. It was very interesting the way it ran. Of course, you get spoiled because when you watch them on DVD or something like that, or Netflix or something like that, you don't have to wait a week to find out what happens in the next episode. You can watch them, like binge watching. You can watch them the whole story all at once. As a matter of fact, that's how they used to do it. Not to mention, when they brought them over here to America and they showed them on PBS, they used to combine them all together, and you used to watch them like a movie. So they didn't split them up as episodes. They combined the film all together, and you watched them almost like a 2-hour movie. But anyway, that in England, that's how they showed them, as half-hour episodes, and they would be 4 to 6 episodes on average. A few of them a little bit longer, maybe a few of them a little bit less. But usually a story would comprise several serialized episodes, and then it would go on to the next story. Alright, hopefully I didn't overdo that. I probably over-explained that a little bit, but I just want people out there who are not familiar with the classic Doctor Who stories to know how it was run, so they won't be confused when I go through this list. Let's start off with the first one, the earliest one that I put on my list. It's The Colony in Space. It was with the third Doctor, John Pertwee. One of my 2 favorite doctors. I'm torn between John Pertwee and Tom Baker. But let's go with John Pertwee. The Colony in Space with John Pertwee. It was a season 8 story. It was story number 58. Keep in mind when I say story 58, I don't mean episode 58, because remember, this is the story comprising of the whole story. So it was story number 58, and it was a 6-part story, meaning 6 episodes for this story. And interesting enough, just to make a note, in season 8, the entire season, every story had the main villain, the Master. Okay, the Master was the main villain. In the beginning of season 8, the Master was introduced. It was the first time the Master was introduced, even though there were some fans, which I don't want to go into now, who believe that some earlier versions of Time Lord Criminals was the Master, but I don't want to go into that. But anyway, the beginning of season 8, we see the Master come to Earth. And the Master is an evil version of the Doctor. He's a Time Lord, but he's a Time Lord criminal. And basically they created him. If you're familiar with Sherlock Holmes had his antithesis. He had his antagonist equal, Professor James Moriarty. If you're familiar with Sherlock Holmes, you know the story of his conflict with Professor Moriarty, and he was the arch villain for Holmes, and the both of them actually died when Sherlock Holmes was trying to defeat him. So he was his equal. So as Professor James Moriarty is to Sherlock Holmes, the Master is to the Doctor. So every story in that particular season. Now, as the seasons went on, every story didn't deal with the Master, but they did have stories where the Master did return. Now, also, let me go on to say this. This is the first story. Colony in Space is the first story. Because remember, if you're familiar with what happened in Doctor Who at the end of the War Games with Patrick Troughton, they forced the Doctor, the Time Lords forced the Doctor to change and regenerate, and they sent him to Earth in exile because of his constant interference with time and other cultures and stuff like that. So it was sort of a mercy, but they sent him to Earth because they know of his fondness for Earth. But the Doctor didn't really like that because he never really liked being tied down to one planet or one time. So that kind of frustrated him. So he was exiled to Earth during that time. So this is the first story we actually get to see in John Pertwee's era during the Doctor's exile to Earth. This is the first time that we get to see where the Doctor goes to another planet. He goes, he's taken to another planet in a TARDIS. But let me explain what the story is about. The Master, in this story, the Master stolen secret files on Gallifrey of this doomsday weapon, this massive doomsday weapon that could be used. Destroy entire star systems and entire galaxies. And of course the Master was obsessed, whereas the Doctor wanted to explore the galaxy and help civilizations, but maintain their freedom. He believed in doing good for people and not interfering and not trying to take over and conquer. The Master believed that. He believed he wanted to conquer the universe. He wanted to conquer the galaxy, and he was looking for weapons, super powerful weapons to do so. And he found this file on Gallifrey of the doomsday weapon, and he stole it. And the Time Lords were concerned about that because if the Master got a hold of that, the Master probably could even destroy them. So the Time Lords send the Doctor and Jo Grant. Now, Jo Grant was the companion at the time. She came at season 8 too as the Doctor's companion. And the Time Lords sent them, obviously against his will, unknowingly against his will, to the planet Euxarius in the year 2472, the 25th century, the late 25th century, to stop the Master. What happens is Doctor gets there to the planet ahead of the Master, and he gets involved. The Doctor ends up getting involved in a conflict between an agrarian colony. Excuse me, I apologize for that. From Earth, and a greedy corporation known as an Interplanetary Mining Corporation, and they wanted, the mining corporation, the IBM, they wanted to force this agrarian farming colony off the planet, force them back to Earth. Well, they felt that they had settled that for an entire generation, and that world was theirs to farm. They were there first, and they felt that they had a good claim to it. But the IBM, the Interplanetary Mining Corporation, which was corrupt, they wanted to use that for profit, and were trying to destroy, either get them to agree to leave, or to try to destroy them. And the Doctor got involved in that conflict. Of course, the Master, in disguised himself as an adjudicator, got involved. But the Doctor knew obviously the Doctor knew who he was. He wasn't from Earth as an adjudicator. He was the Master, there up to his own tricks, trying to find the doomsday weapon. On that planet they had a native species there, and they were primitive, and obviously it's because of that their technology and that doomsday weapon that destroyed their civilization, which was once advanced. And the Doctor had discovered that, but the Master was still trying to find that doomsday weapon. But the Doctor was able to defeat the Master, and that at the end helped the colony. The colony out-tricked the IBM, so they can remain on that planet against the corruption of the Interplanetary Mining Corporation. And he defeated the Master and was able to destroy the Doomsday Weapon, keeping it out of the hand of the Master. So that's the first story of my list of favorites. Ironic enough, Colony in Space, I found out reading some information on the internet, didn't make the fan top favorite, but ironically, it did make my favorite, one of my favorite Doctor Who stories. Okay, moving on. Number 2, The Frontier in Space. Again, it was another Doctor Who story with the third Doctor, John Pertwee. That took place in season 10. It was story number 67. And it was, again, that was a 6-part story, 6-episode story. Interesting enough, even though we're in a season where every story didn't have the Master, this one did. And this was the final story of Roger Delgado. Roger Delgado played, during John Pertwee's years as a Doctor, Roger Delgado played the Master from the beginning, from season 8. He played the Master all the way throughout the entire time that John Pertwee was the Doctor. This was his last appearance as the Master. So see, what happened was Delgado was filming on leave after he filmed that story. He was so after that season had concluded, he was in Turkey, and he was, unfortunately, an accident happened. He was killed in a car accident while on location filming another movie. And it was a car accident. He was his chauffeur was being careless driving, drove off a cliff, and unfortunately that killed him. That devastated John Pertwee, because John Pertwee was good friends with Roger Delgado, and that devastated him. And I guess that was at the time that John Pertwee had announced the following year for season 11 that would be his last year as the Doctor. He would be leaving. And that's when Tom Baker took over. But anyway, interesting enough, just one other note. Terrence Dix and some of the other producers of Doctor Who and writers, they had planned to bring Roger Delgado as the Master one more time during the last season of John Pertwee. And it was going to be a story called The Final Game, in which there was a final conflict between the Master and the Doctor, and there was sort of a resolution that, at the end, when the Doctor and the Master were going to destroy each other, the Master, almost like what happened with Darth Vader, he changed his heart, and at the last second, in the 11th hour, the Master would save the Doctor and die in his stead. But anyway, that didn't happen. Obviously, that script got scratched, that story got scratched, because Roger Delgado was killed, unfortunately. But let's talk about The Frontier in Space. It takes place in the 26th century, and Doctor and Joe Grant, they go into the 26th century, but they get entangled in an escalating Cold War between Earth and Draconia. Draconia was another very powerful alien alliance, and there was an escalating Cold War, accusations between each other of entering each other's territory for imperial control, and accusations of attack between bases and planets and settlements from both sides. And there was a war, this was during their Cold War, but there was a war escalating among them, a galactic war. And the Doctor, the Doctor finds out, because again the Master shows up in disguise, somebody else, as he always does, but Doctor recognizing him for who he is, found out that the Master was trying to provoke that war, and the Doctor was trying to expose the Master's plans to both sides. He was trying to be sympathetic to both sides, of the conflict, both to Earth government and the Triconi government, who the Master was, and what he was trying to do, and he was trying to provoke that war. And ironically, at the end of that story, at the end of the 5th and the 6th episodes, we find out that not only is the Master behind trying to provoke this war, but the Daleks are too, because the Daleks come into the picture, and they're involved in trying to provoke this war too. Because what the Daleks figure is, the Master is trying to help the Daleks, and what the Daleks figured is if they could start a war and both sides destroyed each other in this massive intergalactic war, it would be very easy for the Daleks to move in and conquer the galaxy. So that's why they were trying to provoke this war, just so they would destroy each other and make it easier for the Daleks to come in and take over. And of course, the Master had his own nefarious plans too for conquest, and that's why he was trying to provoke the war. But at the end of the story, it was sort of a two-part story. It led into the 6-part episode, the 6-episode story of Planet of the Daleks. That was the Planet of the Daleks was the following Doctor Who story, following Frontier in Space, and that was a continuing story from Frontier in Space, where the Doctor goes to the place where the Daleks are trying to provoke this war and planning their conquest, and he tries to go to this planet to stop the Daleks' their plan for conquest, in that 6-part story known as the Planet of the Daleks. But I'm not going to go into that now. Probably that would be good to save for a future blog. I think that some of these things I'm glossing over right now, but later on, I probably will get some ideas to do future blogs on, to do more on the mythology of some of these stories, go more to details behind some of these stories and some of these things that are going on. All right, moving on. My next story is Genesis of the Daleks. Now I'm entering into the 4th Doctor, Tom Baker story. It happened in season 12. This was the first season that Tom Baker was the Doctor, in season 12. It was story number 78, and that too, ironically, was a 6-episode story. This was the 3rd story in the Ark series. If you remember, the first story of Tom Baker was the robot. The second story was the Ark in Space, and at the end of the Ark in Space, he doesn't leave through the TARDIS. He tries to go back down to Earth, where in the next story that he encounters the Centaurans after he settles the problem that he has down on Earth in the Ark in Space series. He tries to return to the Ark, but gets intervented from going back to the Ark, where the Doctor, Sir James Smith, who is the companion at this time, and also for a short time Harry Sullivan, also is traveling with him. They're sent to the planet Skaro by the Time Lords, by an organization in the Time Lords, known as the Celestial Intervention Agency, CIA. Ironically, same acronym as the American CIA, American CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, but the Time Lords have the Celestial Intervention Agency. Pretty much the same concept as our Central Intelligence Agency is for America. The Celestial Intervention Agency is for the Time Lords. Very similar. I talked in previous blogs for Star Wars about, like in Star Trek, you have Section 31, the Obsidian Order, the Tal Shiar. Those are the intelligence, secret, covert intelligence agencies. You get the Galactic Empire. They've got their secret, covert intelligence agency and stuff like that. So in Doctor Who, you have the Time Lords have their own one. The CIA, they have their own CIA, the Celestial Intervention Agency. It's a secret intelligence agency, and they're involved in covert affairs. Usually, they operate just like what you would see the British Secret Service or CIA or other covert secret intelligence agencies. is they operate sort of somewhat autonomy. They don't report to the government all the time with their excuse, that plausible deniability for the government, and because what the Celestial Intervention Agency does is they'll interfere with time, and they'll interfere with other cultures, and they'll interfere with time, which is the cardinal rule. Their prime directive as Time Lords, because they're not supposed to interfere. That's their cardinal rule, the top law of Time Lord society. But interesting enough, they send the Doctor and his companions, Sarah Jane and Harry Sullivan. They send them to the planet Skaro. And the reason why they send them to the planet Skaro, and if you know anything about the planet Skaro, that's where the Daleks had originated. And what they do is they inform the Doctor, because the Doctor doesn't want to be involved, but they say we're allowing you freedom for a few favors, and this is one of the favors we're going to ask of you. They send them back into time in Skaro before the Daleks are created. And the reason why is because they fear that Daleks are going to eventually grow in power. So great in power that they can include in their technology and develop and evolve in their technology to eventually conquer the Time Lords. And they want the Doctor to go back prior to their creation and stop them from being created, destroy them before they are officially created and are able to go out in their conquest of the galaxy. And interesting enough, I haven't seen too many fans or too many other people make this connection, but this is a connection really to the new series, the events of the Last Great Time War, because the Last Great Time War was between Gallifrey, between the Time Lords and between the Daleks. So that's an interesting correlation between the events that you see with the Last Great Time War in the new series and the Time Lords' fear of the Daleks in this Doctor Who story, where the Time Lords are fearing the growth of the Daleks and their technology and their evolution, that they would eventually try to take on the Time Lords and be powerful enough to actually take them on. So they're going to do some illegal thing, because this is illegal to interfere with time and commit genocide. That's completely that's they're breaking their cardinal rule for the Time Lords. But the CIA, the Celestial Intervention Agency, wants to do this, and they sort of send the Doctor sort of as a covert agent. Plausible deniability. If he wins or whatever, great. But if he loses, then they could say, "Hey, we were never involved. This was some rogue agent of the Time Lords." But anyway, the Doctor, when he arrives on ancient Skaro, he gets involved. If you know anything, if you remember the original story, when they go to Skaro with the first Doctor, William Hartnell, it was sort of in the modern times of Skaro, where the Thals had evolved into a peaceful, pacifist society, and the Daleks were there. Involved in their conquest. So this was probably later in Skaro's history, but this is the early part of Skaro's history, where Doctor gets involved in this post-apocalyptic war between the Khalids and the Thals. The Khalids and the Thals were the two different races, or two different groups of people, nation states, shall we say, of humanoids, who had very different views of government. Thals were more believed in more of democracy. The Khalids were more aggressive militarily. They had a military society, more aggressive, more conquest and stuff like that. Well, they went to war with each other, and they used nuclear weapons and chemical weapons, and they literally destroyed the planet Skaro. They destroyed their own planet in the process, and they were still involved in this war, even though it was post-apocalyptic on the planet. And interesting enough, when the Doctor arrives and he looks strange, out of time, out of place, he announces that they're aliens. They don't come from Skaro. They don't come from the planet Skaro. They deny that because they don't believe that life exists on other planets. It's interesting enough. We always get that experience when we're watching science fiction films, where people from Earth say, "Oh, there can't be any life or any other living beings on other planets. Well, think about visiting a planet in another star system where that civilization believes that they're the only planet that has life, that no other planet has any living civilization on it. Well, anyway, moving on, the Doctor ends up meeting the college's greatest scientist, Davros. He is the one who created the Daleks. And interesting enough, he becomes one of the Doctor's main villains. So majority of Doctor Who stories from then on, which have Daleks, Davros does show up. But Davros is the creator of the Daleks, and I always compare it. Think of the Colleagues like the Nazis. The Colleagues are very much like the Nazis, militaristic, aggressive society like the Nazis, believing in superiority and bullying other nations and stuff like that. That's the Colleagues' way of life. And Davros is like Joseph Mengele. He was a masterful scientist, genius, but evil to the core. Believed in genocide, believed in racial superiority, and believed in destroying everything that he considered that's lower than himself. And believed in doing genetic experiments on life forms and trying to increase, doing eugenics and trying to create a master race. Very much identical. Davros is very much identical to Joseph Mengele, and the crimes that he committed, the crimes that Davros has committed on Skaro, are very similar to the crimes that Joseph Mengele committed during the time of the Second World War in Germany. Anyway, at the end of that story, the Doctor ends up altering the course of the Dalek development, but he doesn't completely destroy them. He doesn't completely, he gets involved in their affairs, ends up destroying a laboratory where these genetic experiments were going on in the creation of the Daleks, but he doesn't destroy the Daleks, and in a way he purposely doesn't do that. When he leaves, now it's assumed that because, ironically, the Daleks, Davros thinking the arrogance that he thought that his creation was under his control, Davros assumes he has total control over the Daleks, but the Daleks turn on him. And they destroy all the scientists and all the main military leaders that are there amongst the Colleagues, because the Daleks get the impression, they start to see themselves as superior even over them, over their military leaders and their scientists. And Daleks turn on Davros, and it was assumed that he had died, but he had actually lived. And like I said, in the future Dalek stories with Doctor Who, he does appear again. And but I won't get into that now. That'd be good for another blog, for another day. But anyway, the Doctor goes with the device that the Time Lords leave him. He uses that to leave Skaro. And when Sarah and Harry ask why he didn't destroy the Daleks completely, the Doctor makes a very intuitive, gives a very intuitive reasoning, has a very insightful reason why he didn't destroy the Daleks. And he says, because even through all their evil and all their destruction, there is good that has actually come. He said that planets and civilizations that normally would war with each other, they actually come together and join forces together and make peace with one another so they can fight against the Daleks. Their fear of the Daleks is so great that they're willing to put aside their differences so they can join together in a peaceful coalition, so they can fight together against the Daleks. I mean, that's some of the positive things that a peaceful coalition will be made of. Normally, civilizations that would be at war with each other throughout the galaxy, they come together in peace to defend themselves against Daleks. So the Doctor says good does come out of this, even though it appears that the Daleks only exist for evil and destruction. So that's why the Doctor didn't destroy the Daleks completely. Let's go on to the next story, called Terror of the Zygons. This was Fourth Doctor, Tom Baker story. It was the first story of season 13. It was story number 80. And this was a four-part story, 4-episode story. This story also, interesting enough, this was the last story with the character of Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, until we see him again in Peter Davison's story of Mawdryn Undead. The Brigadier was probably one of the most famous characters. He was the leader of UNIT in England, United Nation Intelligence Task Force, which I explained in a previous blog about how they were a special military unit that investigated threats, alien invasions and incursions and stuff like that, and dealt with threats. And they hired the second Doctor had met Brigadier. He was the first one to meet the Brigadier, and he met him in a couple stories. But it wasn't until John Pertwee, the third Doctor, when the Doctor got exiled to Earth, that he offered him a job as a unit scientific advisor, which he took. So he was in majority of the stories with John Pertwee's era. But when we get to Tom Baker, he was less and less. And the Terror of the Zygons was the last story where we do get to see the Brigadier, Lethbridge Stewart. Now, he does appear again in the time of Peter Davison and Mawdryn Undead, and also the 5 Doctors. But anyway, if you're familiar with the end of season 12, at the Revenge of the Cybermen, before the Doctor left Earth, and the story of the Tom Baker's first story, Robot, he left the Brigadier a device which can summon him in case of an emergency. Well, at the end of Revenge of the Cybermen, when a Doctor gets back to his TARDIS, he notices that that device has been used. So the Brigadier summons the Doctor, which we pick up in the season 13 with Terror of the Zygons. The Brigadier is summoning the Doctor back to Earth to help UNIT investigating the sinking of oil rigs off the coast of Scotland. All these oil rigs have been sinking, and strange stories are being told off the coast of Scotland. So the Doctor goes to Scotland and goes to the UNIT's headquarters in Scotland, and finds out what helps Brigadier and UNIT do an investigation of what's been sinking these oil rigs, and hearing the stories of this giant monster that was destroying the oil rigs off of Scotland and the ocean. The Doctor discovers that these stories of this great monster destroying oil rigs is true. That it was the Loch Ness Monster. Loch Ness Monster was able to go into Loch Ness, that massive lake in Scotland, Loch Ness, but it was also had a underground passage which was able to go out to the sea. So this Loch Ness Monster was real, and this Loch Ness Monster was being controlled by the race of Zygons. And if you Zygons are very tall aliens. They have the puckered shape face and body and stuff like that. And you're probably familiar with them if you saw Day of the Doctor, because they returned in the 50th anniversary story of Day of the Doctor with Matt Smith, which I found fascinating, and I really love that they brought them back. But what had happened is that was a weapon. The Loch Ness Monster ended up was real, but it was a mechanical monster being used by the race of the Zygons, because they had crash landed there centuries ago, unable to return to their home planet, and they decided they wanted to make the Earth their home race, and the Loch Ness Monster was going to be their weapon to try to destroy any opposition faced by the humans to try to take over the Earth. And they were going to use that creature to overpower the people of the Earth and take over. And also the Zygons had the power, you'll know this if you saw also in Day of the Doctor, they have the power to change shape-shifting, because they used real human bodies, real humans, as body prints, and then they can disguise themselves as humans. Well, the Doctor uncovers their plot, and is able to stop them, able to defeat them and destroy their ship, which was hidden underneath the Sea of Loch Ness. And he was able to destroy the Loch Ness Monster, but he was able to cause it without their power controlling it. It just went underneath the sea and disappeared for time immemorial. Well, anyway, that was a story for the Zygons. I just thought that it was a genius story, and a genius concept with the Zygon race, very scary race, and introducing a classic monster known as the Loch Ness Monster, that's one of the most famous monsters, just like Bigfoot or the Yeti and stuff like that. And I love how Doctor Who uses some of those ancient legends and puts them into their science fiction mix, or their science fiction story, which is ingenious. But anyway, that's that for Terror of the Zygons. Let's go on to the next story, The Pyramids of Mars. This was the Fourth Doctor Tom Baker story, again in season 13. Now keep in mind, majority of the stories that I have on my list are from season 13. That tended to be my favorite season. Like I said, I loved all the stories and all the seasons of Doctor Who, but that tended to be, if you're going to pin me down to a favorite, that tended to be my favorite season. And that is not unusual. That's not to anyone's surprise, because anyone who's a Doctor Who fan, especially of the classic series, knows that season 13, actually season 12, 13, and 14, shall I say, were known by fans as the golden age of Doctor Who, and because majority of fans believe that those were the best stories that came out of Doctor Who during those three seasons, season 12, 13, and 14, which were the first three seasons of Tom Baker. And this tends to be The Pyramids of Mars is absolutely my favorite story of all time, my favorite Doctor Who story of all time, which I'll get into in a minute. It's story number 82, and it's a 4-episode story. Okay, and it takes place in Egypt. It starts off with Egypt in 1911. Archaeologist Marcus Scarman enters an undiscovered tomb that was recently discovered in a pyramid, because he's an archaeologist in Egypt, excavating a pyramid, discovers an undiscovered tomb. Unwisely enters it. His helpers, Egyptian helpers, who are superstitious, run. Of course, he, being the scientist, rational scientist, enters in where angels fear to tread, and encounters a very powerful force, a being of very powerful force, which destroys him. At this time, the Doctor and Sarah Jane are in the TARDIS, and they're on their way back to unit headquarters. And when this powerful image in the shape of an alien jackal, which appears, this apparition of an alien jackal appears in the TARDIS, and knocks the TARDIS way off its path. The Doctor traces the signal to England. So he figures the Doctor knows that since nothing can really get into the TARDIS, that something powerful beyond imagination can only have that kind of power, knock the TARDIS off its course. So the Doctor has to investigate, because he knows there's danger, really powerful and dangerous, at work. So he has to trace the signal and investigate what's going on. He traces the signal to England, to the Scarban family home in 1911, and ironically, that happens to be the future home of Unit HQ in 1980. In the time where Sarah Jane is from. The Doctor and Sarah encounter killer robots in the form of mummies. And it's interesting because in a lot of the stories in seasons 12, 13, and 14 take a lot of the classic monster movies, the Universal monster movies, and King Kong, Frankenstein, the Mummy, and stuff like that, and they turn them into their own science fiction stories, their own science fiction twist. Well, they had mummies. Well, these weren't mummies from Egypt, but the mummies were actually robots, and they were the military force for this alien threat. And they killed people that got in the way. And the mummies were being controlled by an enemy known as Sutek. And Sutek, and that's who the Doctor's enemy was for this story, the main enemy. And he was controlling the mummies, and he controlled other humans too, for his purpose. And Sutek, now, who Sutek was, he was the last of a powerful alien race known as the Osirans. I'll explain what the Osirans were. The Osirans were from the ancient times. Keep in mind, the ancient times, remember, if you remember The Unearthly Child with William Hartnell, the first Doctor Who story, Susan Foreman, the Doctor's granddaughter, explains to Barbara and Ian, their high school teachers, that they came from a race, they're from an alien race, which saw the peak, the golden age of their civilization, long before humans were on the Earth. So, during that time, you're talking about like millions of years ago, that the Gallifreyans were around. So, Gallifreyans were one of the ancient, known as there was a time called the Ancient Times, and that was before the modern times, which is probably from a couple million years prior to current era in Earth history. I'm speculating. But there was the ancient times, before humans were on the Earth, or before the Earth was created. Which the Gallifrey was around. The Time Lords were one of the most ancient civilizations in the universe. And there was many other races, some of them benevolent, but some of them warlike. But all of them very powerful, and very huge, and very big. And most of them have died out in the modern era. So they're not around anymore. The Time Lords are, but not some of these other races. Well, the Osirans were one of the races from the ancient times, and they looked humanoid, but they had they looked like their faces were like jackals. They looked like animals. So very much similar. What they're saying is that the Osirans the Osiran race influenced ancient Egypt, and the ancient Egyptians worshipped them as gods. Ironically, I was doing some research too, because they were involved in Mars, and during that time, in the ancient time, during the time of ancient Egypt, that's when the Ice Wars were on Mars, and the Ice Wars used to worship them as gods as well. But they were super powerful, mentally super powerful aliens from the ancient times. Well, Sutek, he was the brother of Osiris. He was the brother of Osiris. Well, let me go through this. Okay, Sutek became a paranoid megalomaniac who came to believe that all life was his enemy. And this started back on their home planet. This started before they reached Earth. But Sutek murdered his brother. If you're familiar with Egyptian mythology, Sutek murdered his brother Osiris, and then proceeded to try to destroy his home planet of Feaster Osiris. Feaster Osiris was the home planet of the Osirans. So he murdered Osiris, his brother, who was the ruler at the time. Osiris was the ruler, and he murdered his brother Osiris. Then he destroyed his entire civilization on Feaster Osiris, the planet Feaster Osiris. And only 740 Osirans survived, and they remained. And they were led under the command of Horus. Horus was another Osiran, and he led the 740 Osirans against Sutek. And they chased Sutek all the way to Earth. Now, like I said, by that time when the Osirans came to Earth, they were involved in the ancient Egyptian society, and also the Martian society of ice warriors too. They were building pyramids and stuff like that, and infecting their culture on both planets. But interesting enough, this is what they did. They felt that they couldn't execute him, put him to death, because they would be just as bad as he is. That was their philosophy. They kill him, they're no better than he is. But what they did is they trapped him. They trapped him on Earth underneath an Egyptian pyramid. And the jail came from a pyramid on Mars. There was a machine on Mars which sent a signal to Earth, the pyramid on Earth in Egypt, and that trapped, put him in a prison. So Sutekh was not able to leave that prison underneath that pyramid in Egypt for as long as that signal was being sent from Mars, the pyramid on Mars. Now, what happened is that when Marcus Scarman uncovered that tomb, Sutekh was in there, and Sutekh was the one who destroyed Marcus. But he was able to take over his mind. He killed the person, but was able to take over his body and use him, along with the robot mummies, to create a missile, which was intended to destroy the pyramid on Mars. And his plan was they were going to destroy the pyramid. If they destroyed the pyramid on Mars, they would destroy the signal. The signal would be stopped. Sutekh would be freed from his prison. Then Sutekh would be able to come out of Egyptian tomb and be able to remain on course, because he was the last of the Osirians, and he would be able to go throughout the universe, destroying planet by planet, and even the Time Lords would be unable to destroy him. That's how powerful the Osirians were. It said Sutekh would even be able to destroy the Time Lords. So the Doctor had to stop him before he was released from his prison, because once he was released, the Doctor nor any Time Lord would be able to stop Sutekh at that point. So the Doctor was in a race to stop Sutekh. And interesting enough, there was a scene where Sarah assumed, because they were back in 1911 in England, they assumed that since Sarah was from 1980, that since she was there, the future couldn't be destroyed. And the Doctor took her at that point back to 1980 and showed her the Earth, which was desolate and destroyed obviously by Sutekh, who had, from that timeline, gotten out and was able to destroy Earth and the rest of the universe. And so the Doctor showed, and it was interesting how in that episode that you could see that they had that concept of what an alternate history is, the history that we know, and then the alternate view where the course was changed for history, and we see a different history take place. So they knew that they had to go back to 1911 and stop Sutekh before he was able to get out of that pyramid, because his destruction was a real threat to the universe. Now, what happened was the Doctor ends up going to Mars. They end up going to Mars to try to destroy the pyramid, or the device on the pyramid of Mars that was keeping Sutekh prisoner. And they make a long story short, without going into the details of that story. I encourage you to watch the story. It's like I said, it's one of my favorites. But to give you the Cliff Notes version, Marcus Scarman, controlled by Sutekh, along with the robot mummies, were able to destroy the device on Mars, which would have freed Sutekh. But the Doctor, because of light travels 186,000 miles a second, the Doctor had a few minutes, like a time remaining 5-10 minutes or so, to get back to Earth, because the signal had to travel. The end of that signal had to travel back to Earth, and he had 10 minutes to get back there before it reached Sutekh, and Sutekh was officially freed. So Doctor took that time, in the essence of that time, rushed back to Earth, took the console from the TARDIS, used that to connect that up to the time tunnel from that was in the Scarman home, that was used to connect that to the time tunnel that was connecting that to the Egyptian pyramid, where Sutekh was being held captive. Sutekh then, after the Doctor had set that trap up, Sutekh was freed from his prison, thinking that he could get out. And what happened was that Sutekh traveled through the time tunnel, but the Doctor, sitting up using that console from the TARDIS, trapped Sutekh in that time tunnel. The Sutekh could not get out of that time tunnel. He was still stuck. Even though he was freed from his prison, he was stuck. The Doctor was able to trap him in that time tunnel with the console from the TARDIS. Sutekh, knowing this, even offered the Doctor, saying, "Look, if you free me, I'm going to destroy the rest of the universe, but I'll tell you what, I'll give you the Earth. You can rule the Earth under your rule." not knowing the Doctor's nature, that was, he didn't care to do that. He wanted to save everyone in the universe. So he ignored Sutek's offer. Who knows whether Sutek would have kept his end of the bargain, hypothetically, if the Doctor did accept his offer. But he didn't accept his offer, and he kept him trapped in that time tunnel. And while he was in that time tunnel, it escalated his age. Even though that the Sirens obviously could live thousands of years, Sutek was already 7,000 years old, he was being aged rapidly in that time tunnel. And he was being aged so rapidly that he outlived, because they don't live forever. They're not immortal, they're not eternal. So he outlived his life expectancy, even though it was thousands of years. It was rapidly produced, and essentially Sutek died of old age, ironically, inside that time tunnel. So the Doctor was able to defeat Sutek in that time tunnel and kill him. And it prevented him from getting out of his prison and destroying the rest of the universe. And the Marcus home had burned down at that point in that year, and as the Doctor had left to go back to 1980 in England, but that became eventually, the house burnt down, and that eventually became the future headquarters for UNIT. But anyway, let's moving on. My next one is the Brain of Morbius. That was a fourth Doctor, again, Tom Baker, season 13, and that was story 84. And that was a 4-part story, 4 episodes. And that was very closely related. Remember, like I said, in season 12, 13, and 14, there has a lot of classic monster stories that were turned into, had their science fiction twist. This twist was taken from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. If you remember Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, if you've read the book or have you seen any of the movie adaptations of taking different body parts and then animating them to create a new life form. Essentially, that was the concept behind Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. But also, one thing that I love about the story is it was a story that focused on Time Lord mythology, and a lot of my favorite stories focused on where you got stories that delve deep into Time Lord history and Time Lord mythology. This was one of those stories. And it was taking place on the planet Karn. Okay, the story took place on the planet Karn. And Karn is in the same star system as Gallifrey. And it's ruled by the powerful Sisterhood of Karn. Okay, now, when the Doctor arrives with Sarah Jane and the TARDIS. But he arrives there because the TARDIS is sent against his will, and the Doctor assumes it was the Time Lords that took control of his TARDIS and sent him there to accomplish a mission. He doesn't like that, even though he agrees to do jobs for the Time Lords. He's not as crazy at times. But he's sent to Karn by the Time Lords, unknown why he was sent there. Now, the Sisterhood of Karn has an uneasy alliance with the Time Lords. And so when the Doctor shows up, they're suspicious. The Sisterhood of Karn they're very powerful. It's a society of women, humanoid women, but they have extremely powerful psychic powers. And they can teleport objects and people through their mind. And so that's what they do with the Doctor. They're very suspicious of him. And they think what he's trying to do. See, what they do is they guard a thing called the Elixir of Life. The Elixir of Life is a serum that's produced from underground on the planet. And it helps them, it keeps them almost immortal, because while they're taking it, they can regenerate their cells and keep them alive. And the Time Lords only use it. The Time Lords only use it when they have trouble with a regeneration. When a regeneration doesn't go right. The Elixir of Life, the Elixir does something that helps them fix some of the biological problems with the regeneration. But they usually not after it, and they don't keep it to become immortal, but they only use it, get some from the Sisterhood. And the Sisterhood, and they're having problems with that because the flames, the heat that chemical that create the elixir are dying, or assumed to be dying. And the Sisterhood assumes that the Time Lords know about it, and they sent one of their own to take the remaining elixir steal it from the Sisterhood, which they feel it would have been a crime, and it would deny them of the last of the elixir. Well, what they try to do is they decide that they're going to take action first, so they try to execute the Doctor. Of course, Sarah Jane, you've seen the story, Sarah Jane rescues him. And the Doctor eventually helps them. It's a very simple problem that the Doctor finds out that he's able to fix that problem for them, because it's a lot of soot and congestion that's putting that flame out. So he solves that problem and renews the flame and is able to produce more of the elixir. And that eventually gains the Sisterhood's trust. They start to trust him. But while the Doctor is on Karn, he uncovers a more sinister plot by Dr. Mahendri Solon. Okay, Dr. Solon he's a criminal human scientist, obviously from the future. He's from Earth, but he's from the future. He's like a mad scientist, just like Davros is. A very similar kind of character to Joseph Mengele and Davros and stuff like that. One of those evil criminal genius scientists, but uses his knowledge for evil. And is probably a sociopath, very much similar to a sociopath. And he aligns himself with Morbius, the character of Morbius. Now, who Morbius is, he's Gallifrey's most malevolent criminal of all time. And a long time ago, centuries ago, he got on the High Council. He was one of the leaders of the High Council of Time Lords. Morbius was a Time Lord himself, and he moved himself up to the High Council of Time Lords at the time. But he had malevolent desires for power, and his desire was to end their non-interference and decide that since the Time Lords are the greatest, the most advanced race in the universe, to try to conquer the rest of the universe and have the Time Lords rule over the universe. That was his idea, and he tried to get on the Council of the Time Lords, the High Council of the Time Lords, to use political power to change their policy to do that. But ultimately, the Time Lords rejected Morbius's. They rejected Morbius and his ideas and his political ambitions. And at that time, Morbius had no choice but to flee Gallifrey, and he fled Gallifrey. But he didn't leave alone. He created an army. He created his own personal army, mercenary army, and that became known as the Cult of Morbius. And they fled Gallifrey, and on their own, he attempted, since Gallifrey rejected him, he attempted to use his own mercenary army, and he attempted on his own to try to conquer worlds. And then that path, that really changed. That really influenced the Time Lords, because with the Time Lord being involved in conquering planets and committing genocide, destroying planets that were trying to fight against him, they were involved in a way, and it really affected them. It affected their reputation. It affected their conscience, the Time Lord's conscience, and their relationship with other planets, other advanced civilizations. It affected them in so many ways, and a lot of it negative, what Morbius did. So Morbius was not only just a criminal and who committed genocide and conquest and different various evil crimes against the galaxy, but he affected the Time Lord's relationship with many other advanced civilizations in the universe. So they had to go after Morbius. The Time Lords had to go after Morbius with their own army, and they joined. The Time Lords joined because, remember, I said they have an uneasy alliance with the Sisterhood on Karn, and they joined with the Sisterhood, and together they were able to conquer the Cult of Morbius, the mercenary army, the Cult of Morbius. They captured Morbius, put him on trial, and they executed him. Both the Time Lords and the Sisterhood were there to witness his execution. But before he was executed, Dr. Solon being the mad scientist, he was able to manage to save Morbius' brain. He took his brain out of his body before he was executed. So everybody assumed he was dead. Morbius was dead, and his reign of terror was over. But Dr. Solon saved his brain, and he was trying to capture living beings and put it together, just like you have in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, put together various body parts from different living beings in order to create a new body for Morbius. So Morbius could once again have a body and then begin his campaign over again, his reign of terror again, over bringing back the cult of Morbius, his own cult, his own personal mercenary army, to again continue his conquest. And he actually tried to use the Doctor. He thought the Doctor had the perfect body and the perfect head, but the Doctor uncovered this plot. And even though the Sisterhood didn't believe him at first, the Sisterhood of Karn didn't believe him at first because they assumed he was dead. Doctor was able to eventually convince them that Morbius was alive. And they helped him. Make a long story short again, I don't want to go into all the details of the whole entire story, but the Doctor was able to defeat Morbius with the Sisterhood's help. And he was destroyed, and Dr. Solon was killed. It was assumed that, of course, the expanded universe of Doctor Who, they have some novels where Morbius does come back, I think. But essentially, Morbius was defeated and he was assumed dead after he fell off a cliff on Karn, and Dr. Solon was killed when the Doctor tried to use cyanide gas to force him to come out of his trying to revive Morbius after putting him into a new body. So anyway, the Doctor left Karn with respect from the Sisterhood because they had helped him, and that ends that story of the story of Morbius. Going on now to the Seeds of Doom. Seeds of Doom, and that was a Fourth Doctor Tom Baker story, season 13. That was story number 85, and that was a 6-part story, 6-episode story. And it was very similar. If you ever seen Day of the Triffids, it was a very similar story to the Day of the Triffids, where the plants try to take over. The plants try to take over. These plants come alive and they try to take over the Earth. That was a classic science fiction movie that used to be very similar to that. But I also like to compare it to The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. Now, this story came out before John Carpenter's, because John Carpenter's The Thing came out, I think, in 1981 or 82. This was still in the 70s when this came out. The story came out. But there was an older classic thing, which John Carpenter's The Thing was based on. And so The Thing is very similar, I think, to the Seeds of Doom. Keep in mind, like I said, seasons 12, 13, and 14 had a lot of classic monster stories that had their own science fiction twist. This was one of them, taken from the Day of the Triffids and also The Thing. This also marked the Doctor's final major involvement with UNIT. Because, like I said, when we get to when John Pertwee's Doctor, we see UNIT and the characters UNIT, like the Brigadier and Benton and Mike Yates, in almost every story. But by the time we get to Tom Baker's Doctor, he's traveling again throughout the universe, so we see UNIT less and less. He's still working for UNIT on occasion, but we see them less and less. Well, this marked the last story of the major involvement in UNIT. I mean, later on, I think there was some time, one time in Sylvester McCoy, that he got involved in UNIT again. But this is the last major involvement story where he gets involved with UNIT, helping UNIT as their scientific advisor. All right. Anyway, let's go on. In the story, a team of scientists in Antarctica find two vegetable-based pods that have been buried in the permafrost for 20,000 years. So they report this back to England, and UNIT, of course, they're the ones that investigate alien threats, knowing that this was an alien thing that came, and it should, it's shouldn't have been there because it was landed in the permafrost and was there after Antarctica ceased being tropical. It became, it became the frozen continent as we know it today. But it was there 20,000 years. It came there 20,000 years ago. So UNIT sends the Doctor and Sarah Jane to investigate. The Doctor recognizes the vegetable pods to be the pair of crinoids. They're known as crinoids. And what a crinoid is an intragalactic alien plant. They get hurled off their home planet through an explosion. So there's various explosions maybe created by volcanoes and other earthquakes and other things. And it hurls these pods off of their planet and sends them off hurtling into space. And after time, they eventually crash land through centuries and millennia. They eventually crash on various planets, some of them which have life on them, plant life and animal life. And wherever they land and there's animal life, they end up consuming all the animal life. They eat this is very similar to the Day of the Triffids, where they eat animal life, all the animal life on the planets. Well, the Earth was safe for that time because they weren't there amongst other planets in a more of a tropical area or more of a temperate area where there's animal life and plant life, so they can consume it. So it was buried in the permafrost and it was safe. But when they found it and it was discovered, then it became a threat. Now, what happened was this is a criminally minded millionaire, known as Harrison Chase. He was obsessed with plant life. And he was very sadistic, very narcissistic. And, and of course he thought he was above the law and used corrupt political officials to get knowledge of these crinoids, pods. And when he became aware of the crinoid, he sent 2 mercenaries to Antarctica to obtain these pods. And then he was trying throughout the entire story, he was trying to kill the Doctor and Sarah Jane because they knew they worked for UNIT, and they were basically a huge obstacle. They were a threat to him. Since they were like the police, essentially their police force, somebody who could shut him down, Harrison Chase down, and expose his plans. They were Harrison Chase had ordered his mercenaries to kill the Doctor, and throughout the entire story, he was trying to kill the Doctor and Sarah Jane to silence them because of their knowledge of the pods. But ultimately, through Harrison Chase's experiments, one of the mercenaries that was working for Harrison Chase got touched. I mean, one of the tentacles from the pods was able to touch him. And all of a sudden his body started to change, his DNA and his biology started to change in the plant. And eventually he turned into this giant crinoid weed. Like a gigantic, we're talking about maybe the size of a dinosaur or even bigger. That's how size. You can stand over a cathedral, and it was sentient because it could speak. It learned, and most likely the reason why it was able to speak the way it was English to people was because it took over a human form and entirely absorbed the human nature, the ability to talk and stuff like that. That's why the crinoid was able to speak as it did. But it was intelligent. It wasn't just some mindless animal. It was an intelligent. It knew what it was doing, and it had psychic power. So it was able to control. It was sort of used its psychic power to control plants, and all of a sudden, people from all over the country and all over Europe were reporting that normal, regular plants and trees that were in people's yards and that were in parks and stuff like that, or attacking and killing people. Well, this crinoid wanted to consume all human life, eat it, and take over the entire Earth. And what happened? And then eventually Harrison Chase, he was taken over by the Krynoid, but of course his psychotic behavior was almost in line, so it wasn't too much of a stretch. How Harrison Chase, possessed by the Krynoid, mentally by the Krynoid the Krynoid weed, was trying to help the Krynoid take over and kill the Doctor and kill also anyone else helping the Doctor trying to defeat the Krynoid. But in the end, the Doctor was able to defeat him, killing Harrison Chase. And then he called in at the end of the story, make a long story, give you the Cliff Notes version, calls in an airstrike from Unit. Unit sends their fighter jets in, and from an airstrike, they destroy the Krynoid weed and stop the Krynoid from taking over the Earth. And that sort of ends the story with that. Okay, let's go on to the next one, The Deadly Assassin. The next story is The Deadly Assassin. Fourth Doctor story, Tom Baker. And now we're going into season 14. This is a season 14 story. Story number 88. It's a 4-part story, a 4-episode story. This is the first story which takes place. Now keep in mind, well, let me back up. First story that takes place on the planet Gallifrey. Keep in mind, we've seen the Time Lords and we've seen Gallifrey before, but it was only in cameos and stuff like that in previous Doctor Who stories. But this is the first time the Doctor actually goes back to Gallifrey for an entire story, so we get to see more of Gallifreyan society. From after The Deadly Assassin, there are 4 more stories that take place on Gallifrey. The Invasion of Time, Tom Baker's story, which was story number 97. The Arc of Infinity, which was a Peter Davison story, of story 123. And of course, the 20th anniversary special, The 5 Doctors, story 129, which was during Peter Davison's era. And the last one was Trial of a Time Lord. Now, Trial of a Time Lord doesn't take place on the planet Gallifrey, but it does take place on a Gallifreyan space station, and that was the entire season. Just like season 16, Tom Baker's Doctor, season 16. The entire story had the theme of the Key of Time serial. Well, Trial of a Time Lord was a serial that took place over the entire season, and that was with Colin Baker. And actually, that was the last time that Colin Baker was the Doctor. And that was story. Actually, even though it was several stories, they put it together to count it as one story. So story 143. It was patterned after the Maturing Candidate, even though, like I said, seasons 12, 13, and 14 had classic monster stories, the science fiction twist. But even though this wasn't a classic monster story, the Manchurian Candidate, which was the story patterned after, is a classic story. The Manchurian Candidate essentially came out of the height of the Cold War era, the paranoia of communism, and it was a story where Western citizens could be brainwashed by Eastern communists to go back to their home countries and to assassinate political figures and stuff like that, so the communists would be able to take over the West. It was a very famous story. They made a movie, again, back in the day when the height of the Cold War and the scare of the communists, but it was remade, again, less than 10 years ago, I believe, into a remake. But it's a very famous story, a classic story, The Manchurian Candidate. Okay, this is what it's about. In the previous story, which was Sarah Jane's last story, the Hand of Fear, at the end of that story, the Doctor gets a call, a psychic call, to return to Gallifrey. Well, he can't bring a human there, so that's where he takes Sarah back to Earth and leaves her there. And of course, that ends up being Sarah's last Doctor Who story that she was in. Of course, she does appear and later the five Doctors and stuff like that. And he's also in the new Doctor Who series. But the Doctor, after receiving a call from the Time Lords, the Doctor returns to his home planet of Gallifrey. When he arrives, he receives a premonition, a mental premonition, that he will assassinate the president of the Time Lords. And this bothers him because he sees himself. Again, we're getting there, that conspiracy theory, brainwashing from the Manchurian Candidate that Doctor fears. He doesn't understand why he will be the assassin of the president of the Time Lords. The president is getting ready to retire, but hasn't chosen his successor yet. But during this time, the Doctor is traveling around the Panopticon. Remember, the Panopticon is equivalent to Panopticon on Gallifrey is a building, and it's a political building. But think of it as what Parliament is in London, and what Capitol Hill is in DC. That's what the Panopticon is on Gallifrey. It's the political center, the political building for the Time Lords. And the president's getting ready to make a speech of resignation at the Panopticon. But the Doctor travels around in the Panopticon incognito so the Time Lords won't recognize him. He's trying to uncover the mystery of his premonition. But when the president comes out to speak, the Doctor sees a rifle, and then you see him trying to shoot, and then the president falls down dead. Obviously, the Doctor is arrested immediately, and he's put on trial. And they want to make a quick trial because the president didn't announce his successor before he was killed. It put them in a very awkward political situation, a very dangerous and awkward political situation, because there was going to be many others who were going to claim ascendancy for an election. So they needed to push for an election for a new president. And in order to cover up that awkwardness, because he believed the Doctor was the perpetrator, they wanted to give him a quick trial and then execute him for his crime. So the Doctor knew his time was up. He was going to die if he didn't prove his innocence. So he used he claimed during his trial, he claimed Article 17. What Article 17 is in Time Lord law is you can make a claim for the presidency because the president hasn't named his successor. So he makes a claim for the presidency for an election. But he doesn't do it because he wants to become the president. He uses it as a legal loophole to give him enough time to prove his innocence. And it's interesting, make a note, there's a story theme, a story arc of the Doctor's ascendancy to presidency that carries through the rest of all the other Doctor Who stories, which takes place on Gallifrey. His ascendancy, his throwing in his name for the election to become president of the Time Lords, president on Gallifrey. That happens, the invasion of time, the Arc of Infinity, the Five Doctors, the trial of the Time Lord. They'll deal with that. They have some type of dealing. So that sets the motion. That sets the story arc going in place. When the Doctor claims in The Deadly Assassin, he uses Article 17. But he does so not because like I said, he doesn't want to become the president. He's just using it as a legal loophole to give him enough time so they won't execute him. Give him enough time to prove his innocence. The Doctor demonstrates that he has been framed because he shows. He claims that when he picked up the rifle and shot it, he wasn't aiming it at the president. He saw the assassin and was trying to shoot the assassin before the assassin shot the president. But then noticed afterwards and proved it to the Time Lords, the other Time Lords, that the rifle was put there on place. There was a conspiracy in place put there. That rifle was put there in place, but was aimed to misdirect. And the Doctor proved it was aimed to misdirect, so it wouldn't hit the assassin. It would throw his aim off, and they would make it look like that the Doctor was the one who had assassinated the president. So they knew at that point that there was a major conspiracy, that someone had went way out of the way to frame the Doctor for the assassination of the president. But it's interesting enough, the Doctor, during this investigation, he discovers the Master is actually behind the conspiracy. Remember I said Roger Delgado was the last, in the Frontier in Space, it was the last time. Well, they couldn't do that other last story with the Master, so they brought the Master back, but obviously, another person was playing the Master, so they wanted to continue the story over the Master. So the Master is back on Gallifrey, and he's behind the conspiracy. So the Doctor goes, and he wonders. What happens is the Doctor is trying to find information. They go to an APC net. That's known as the Matrix. Now, the APC net on Gallifrey, their Matrix. And it's interesting enough, very similar. You think of the movie The Matrix. It's a very similar concept. It's a vast computer network, and it's made up of Time Lord minds and records. All the records of Time Lord history and knowledge, and also all the minds of Time Lords that have passed away. It's recorded in that. So it's a computer matrix. But a lot of this information about the conspiracy and the Master have been erased, and the Doctor doesn't know why. So he cannot find out the co-conspirator who's helping the Master, because it was that person who was the assassin. It's the one who was helping the Master, and the Doctor doesn't know his identity because that information was erased. So the Doctor, in order to find out who is behind this, who's helping the Master, he enters the Matrix, but against good warning, because it was very dangerous. Very similar, if you've seen the movie The Matrix, whatever. The Matrix on Gallifrey works the same way. If you die, if your mind dies inside that Matrix, you die in real life. So that's why it was dangerous. The Doctor enters the Matrix, and through that he discovers the true assassin. The true assassin, which was one of the main characters in the story, is Chancellor Goth. And the reason why he was helping the Master is because Chancellor Goth wanted to be the next. He felt he was owed, and rightly due, to be the next president of the Time Lords when the former president was to step down in retirement. But he learned that the president was not going to appoint him as successor. And he became bitter and angry and power hungry because of that. So he conspired with the Master. He conspired with the Master to assassinate the president before he can announce his successor. Use the Doctor as a patsy, and then he can eventually ascend to the presidency himself. Of course, that failed. The Doctor discovered that plot. The Doctor was able to escape from the Matrix alive, almost got himself killed, but Goth, in that conflict, he was mortally wounded. But before he died, he confesses everything. And then the Time Lords absolve the Doctor of all of his crimes. But the Doctor stays around on Gallifrey to try to uncover what the Master was doing, because we know what Goth was trying to do, his plot. What was the Master trying to do? Well, he uncovers the Master's plan. See, keep in mind that we learned that the Time Lords all have a life cycle of 12 regenerations. So 13 lives, 12 regenerations before they die. The Master had finished his last regeneration, and he was trying to regenerate, become immortal, and regenerate again. And he got disformed and disfigured when he was trying to regenerate again, because he wasn't supposed to. He finished his regeneration cycle. So he came back to try to use Time Lord technology. Particularly, his conspiracy was to use the Eye of Harmony. Keep in mind, the Eye of Harmony is the device that holds the energy underneath the Panopticon on Gallifrey that came from a black hole, and that energy source, extremely powerful, is what gives the Time Lords their power. Is the energy that gives them their power for their TARDIS and the time travel and their advanced technology, etc., etc. but he was going to use the Eye of Harmony to give himself a whole new regeneration cycle, to use the energy in it, so he would be able to harness the energy to give himself a whole new regeneration cycle. But in doing so, using that, bringing the Eye of Harmony out would also destroy Gallifrey, and probably most of all the other planets in that star system, too, killing all the Time Lords. The Doctor is able to give you the cliff notes of the end of that story. The Doctor is able to defeat the Master, assuming that he died. Kit was killed, but of course the Master did survive, as always. And the Doctor was able to restore the Eye of Harmony back underneath the Panopticon, but it would cause major damage and a lot of death. But the Time Lords were grateful to the Doctor that he saved Gallifrey. And at the end, you see both the Doctor go into his TARDIS, leave Gallifrey, and also the Master made it back to his TARDIS, and the Time Lords recognized that they would cross paths again, that eventually, the Doctor would encounter his archenemy again. So that kind of ends that story, but that was a very fascinating story. Okay, on to the 9th story. We're going to jump ahead a few seasons. My ninth story that I put is my favorite. It's The State of Decay. It's a 4th Doctor story, Tom Baker, season 18. Season 18 was Tom Baker's last season as the Doctor. He stayed on the longest of all the Doctors, including the new series. He stayed on for 7 years as the Doctor. This was story 112, and it was a 4-part story, 4-episode story. And even though it was past that era where they were using a lot of, like I said, season 12, 13, 14, where they're using classical monsters, this one did. This one returned to that theme of using a classic monster, the classic monster stories, but with their own science fiction twist. And this one being my favorite because I was always into vampires when I was younger, when I was a kid. Scary movies with vampires, Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and all that kind of stuff. And British Hammer Productions had their own series of horror movies, and the British Hammer Dracula films, with Christopher Lee playing Dracula and Peter Cushing playing Van Helsing. There was a series of movies where the both of them played those roles, and I used to love watching those as a kid. So The State of Decay is based off that theme of the British Hammer Dracula films. This was the second story of the E-Space trilogy, and again, another story, Doctor Who story, that focuses on Time Lord mythology. Remember, like I said, I love the Doctor Who stories which focus on Time Lord history and mythology. Okay, the story is about the Doctor, Romana, and K9. Remember, Romana is a Time Lady. She's also Gallifreyan and a Time Lord. She's traveling with the Doctor, and K9, the robot dog, are trapped in E-Space. E-Space is exospace. And what exospace is it's a smaller universe existing alongside in-space, which stands for normal space. So it's another universe, a pocket universe that exists alongside the regular universe. But E-Space has negative coordinates because the Doctor, he got trapped in E-Space. Romana was called back to Gallifrey, so they were headed back to Gallifrey, and they traveled through this. I'm trying to think of the name of this device, or the name of this sort of like a black hole vacuum device, which sent them into E-Space and has negative coordinates. So they thought they were on Gallifrey. The coordinates said they were on Gallifrey, and even when the Doctor looked through his visor, it had Gallifreyan landscape. But it was tropical. When they went outside, they knew they were on Gallifrey because the planet was tropical. That was in full circle, but I don't want to go into that story now. So, but the Doctor recognized that E-Space was very similar to in-space, but it had negative coordinates. So they were exactly at the place where Gallifrey was, but on from the negative coordinate side. A planet that was supposed to be where Gallifrey would be in normal space. But anyway, in the second story of the E-Space trilogy, because there was 3 stories that took place in E-Space, where the Doctor was trapped in E-Space. The Full Circle, which I mentioned, State of Decay, which was second, and the Warrior's Gate, which was the third. So the state of decay was the second one. And as the Doctor was trying to find a way out of E-space, he discovered a planet, an unknown planet, an unnamed planet. And it caught his interest because the TARDIS registered it had high technology. But when he went there, the people were primitive. It was almost like landing in a medieval society on Earth. Two didn't mix. Well, as the Doctor investigates on the planet and he questions the peasants tell him the three who rule, and say that the three who rule forbid them from exploring in science and technology. So this interested Doctor even more because they're aware of science and technology, but they're not allowed to use it, and they don't have it. But yet, the TARDIS tells them that somewhere it exists on that planet. The three who rule live in this castle, this massive castle. And there's, meaning basically there are three people who rule that planet over the peasants and keep them subjugated. Their names are Zargo, Camilla, and Archon. Those are the three individuals who are ruling over that planet. It's a tyrannical rule, forbidding the use of science and technology. The Doctor discovers they were once ancient astronauts. Throughout this investigation, he discovers they were once ancient astronauts. And the castle that they're living in was an ancient ship known as the Hydrax. That was their spaceship. The three who rule were turned into vampires long ago by the Great One, and they serve him. So the three who rule were the ones who rule over the planet. They were vampires. They were turned into vampires. They rule over the peasant population, and they use them. They take members of the peasant populations. Few of them are used for service things like guards or other service things for the castle, but most of them that are used are taken away or never seen again because they're used for blood for the Great One, to feed the Great One. And the three rule, they rule over the planet, tyranny, but they ultimately serve the Great One because their master is the Great One. Let me explain who the Great One is. The Great One is the last of the great vampires. They're colossal humanoids with gray skin and large wings. Now, these creatures are also from the ancient times. Remember, I talked about the ancient times with the Osirians, beings, other alien races and beings that existed alongside the Time Lords prior to the time of Earth. Okay, these great vampires, which I've just described, they were released accidentally from another dimension by the Time Lords. This has happened during the ancient times. Time Lords accidentally released these beings from another dimension known as the Great Vampires. And these great vampires start to use to consume the blood of living beings on different planets. So the Time Lords felt responsible, and they became the enemies of the great vampires, and they fought a war with them. The Time Lords were ultimately able, at great cost, they were able to destroy them all. But there was one who escaped, and that's the King Vampire. The King Vampire escaped into E-space. He fled when the Time Lords destroyed all the vampires, and the King Vampire escaped. He escaped so he wouldn't be detected by the Time Lords. He escaped into E-space, and they took a spaceship, the Hydrax, with them that had 3 human astronauts. Now, I guess that they're from the future. Somehow, some type of time travel happened where the King Vampire was able to have contact with that Hydrax, which had 3 astronauts. And at that time, he turned them into vampires. And they went into E-space, and the great King Vampire went into sleeping, and the 3 astronauts became vampires. They became the 3 who rule, and put them over rulership over peasants of that planet to be used for blood and for other things. And they lived that way for 1,000 years, waiting for the time of the Rising. And the time of the Rising took place after that. The time of the Rising was to take place after that 1,000 years, where the King Vampire He was awake from his sleeping. And when he awoke from his sleeping, he would take the three who rule, and he would re-enter. He supposedly knew how to re-enter normal space from E-space. And then he would resume his quest for conquest, to take over the universe and to use all the living beings in the universe for blood, and to turn other living beings from various planets into vampires. And it's ironic because the Doctor has mentioned in that episode that the great vampires were a major threat and a major enemy of the Time Lords. And because of the great vampires' influence throughout the universe, throughout the galaxy, many vampire legends rose up because of that on various planets. Like on Earth, ultimately the vampire legends and from the Carpathian Mountains in Eastern Europe and stuff like that, that's where they ultimately got those legends going back from thousands of years to the time of the great vampires, and where Bram Stoker got his idea for his novel Dracula. But Transylvania and the Carpathian Mountains and stuff like that, usually those legends go back to the time of the great vampires, as the Doctor had mentioned. And there was a message by Rassilon, the Doctor uncovered, because Rassilon put a message in all Type 40 TARDISes, which was the Doctor's TARDIS, that any Time Lord that encountered this great vampire, this king vampire, was to stop him at any cost, even at the sacrifice of his own life, because this king vampire was not to resume his conquest of the galaxy over that major threat, knowing how powerful he was. So what happened, to give you the Cliff Notes version, is the vampire, knowing that the Doctor and Romana were Time Lords, their great enemies, and the great enemy of the King Vampire, they were going to sacrifice them to the King Vampire in his time of rising. But the Doctor was able to defeat them, so he used one of the scout ships from the Hydrix. And he used that as, just like Van Helsing using a stake against Dracula, he used that as his form of stake. He programmed the scout ship to take off and to return, and it pierced the heart of the King Vampire, and it killed and at that point it killed the last of the great vampires, the King Vampire. And as you know from following the classic legends, vampire legends, after you kill the head vampire, all the other vampires, lower vampires that he turned, also die. So after the King Vampire had died by that scout ship piercing his heart, then it followed that the three who rule, Zargo, Camilla, and Alcon, if I'm pronouncing that right, those are the three rule, they automatically died and they returned to dust, as vampires do after they die. So the Doctor was able to defeat them, the last of the great vampires. But I just love that because it was like a classic vampire with that science fiction twist. It was a perfect twist for that, for a Doctor Who story. Well, anyway, let me go on to my last one. Number 10. Earthshock. Now we're moving past Tom Baker, because Earthshock is a Fifth Doctor story. Peter Davison was the Fifth Doctor. Earthshock was Peter Davison's story. It was from season 19 of Doctor Who, and it was story 121. And ironically, it was a fan favorite amongst Doctor Who fans. It was a 4-part story, 4 episodes, and it had significant things because it had the return of the Cybermen. The Cybermen were not seen since the time of Revenge of the Cybermen, which was in the Tom Baker's first season. So now we're moving a few seasons up with Peter Davison, and now season 19. Season 12 was the last time we saw the Cybermen. Now it's season 19, and the Cybermen return. Now the story is also significant because it sees death, which was very unusual for a Doctor Who story. For a Doctor Who, is to see the death of a major character, a companion, and we saw the death of Adric in the story, which was a very tragic ending for Adric. But what happens, the Doctor is arguing with Adric, because at the time at this point in his travels with the Doctor, he feels he's being disrespected and unwanted. And he asks the Doctor to take him back to E-Space, to his home planet of Pterodon. Pterodon was the home planet of his race in E-Space. But the Doctor argues with him, that's impossible. It's very tricky, it's probably too hard to enter E-Space again, and it's out of the question. But Adric makes an agreement with him, very reluctantly, if he can make the mathematical, because keep in mind, Adric was a mathematical genius. And he can make the mathematical equations to set the coordinates to safely travel in E-Space. Would he do it? So the Doctor reluctantly agrees, but he's not happy with that. So he lands the TARDIS on Earth. So lands the TARDIS on Earth in the year 2526, early 26th century. And while the Adric plots the coordinates to safely travel through E-Space, the Doctor takes a walk. He needs to take a break. He's frustrated with Adric. He takes a break, walks around the caves, these caves, underground caves, and with Tegan and Nyssa, they looking at the fossils, dinosaur fossils, and contemplating and talking about the dinosaurs and their demise. Now, during this time, there's a scientific expedition who are studying these fossils as well, and they're trying to dig underneath and get to these layers. But all of a sudden, they're being systematically killed by these unknown androids. And it's interesting enough. Now, going back to the Doctor is contemplate these dinosaurs, and he makes a note that he knows the theories of how the dinosaurs died, but he always had intended to, but never got around to going back to the time of the dinosaurs to discover how they died out. But that contemplation gets cut off because he discovers these humans are being killed by these androids, and he uncovers, and during the time the Doctor investigates, he uncovers a plot by the Cybermen. And at the time of the beginning of the Cyber Wars. And what's happening with the Cyber Wars in the 26th century is several planets, including Earth and several other alien races, have aligned themselves together in order to defeat the Cybermen. And they're planning to have a major meeting on Earth in order to strategize on how they're going to use their forces to stop the Cybermen army. Well, the Cybermen want to put an end to that, knowing that could very well be the end of their army, their conquest plans. So they try to stop the meeting on Earth by first planting a bomb underneath those caves, and it was like a super cyber bomb, a massive cyber bomb that would have destroyed the Earth. But the Doctor had stopped it, and intervened, disarmed the bomb, and foiled their plans. So the Cybermen, frustrating the Cybermen's plans, the Cyber Leader goes to Plan B, a backup plan, in which they attempt to take over a cargo ship that's out in space. It's headed back to Earth. This cargo ship is using antimatter as its power source to travel through space, and the Cyber Leader uses his army to take over that cargo ship, take control of the Doctor and his companions and the other humans that are aboard that cargo ship, and plan to crash land it, use it to crash land that ship into Earth to create a catastrophic calamity that would ultimately destroy all life on Earth, which ultimately would end the Alliance and still make which would end with the Cybermen being the dominant force in the galaxy. But at this time, to give you the Cliff Notes version of the story, the Doctor is able to defeat the Cyber Leader and his army. But the freighter ship, going at warp speed, something happens, and it goes into a time warp and travels back into time, but while still heading towards Earth. What the Doctor discovers at that point, when he knows it's inevitable that freighter ship is going to crash land into Earth, he noticed at the time period that both the TARDIS and that freighter ship, after defeating the Cybermen, they discovered that they've been traveling back in the time to 65 million years prior to the 26th century. 65 million years. Well, anybody who is a geologist and paleontologist know that that's when the dinosaurs were last seen, towards the end of the Cretaceous period, and that's when the dinosaurs died out. And the Doctor discovers that the Cybermen's plan, even though it was fully effective, instead of destroying the Earth and changing human history, it actually confirmed it. It actually was in line, and that happened in other stories, like the Visitation, when the pterodactyls tried to have a plague to develop a plague to destroy humanity. Well, it ended in the result of the London Fire of 1666, which was historically what happened. So what happened in the history books was actually confirmed. It was actually, it was like that circular time that their actions actually created the events which are recorded in known history. Well, that's what happened with the Cybermen. They thought that they were destroying Earth, but the time warp took them back to 65 million years at the end of the Cretaceous period. Doctor discovered that the Earth wasn't in danger, but actually that they were in that time cycle, that they were causing the events of recorded history. And when that ship crash landed on Earth, that created a catastrophic event which blocked out the sun, created the nuclear winter, and blocked out the sun, which ultimately killed the dinosaurs, which was known killing. That was the calamity event that killed the dinosaurs off at the end of the Cretaceous, which is interesting. But see, Adric at the time, he was on the freighter. He was on the freighter. Now everybody else had abandoned that freighter because they knew there was no hope of trying to break the Cybermen's codes. Adric thought he could break them. He was confident that keep working at, he could break it. If he could break the codes, then he could avert the freighter ship from crashing into the Earth. Now keep in mind, Adric did not know that he did not need to do that because human history was actually on course, being at the time zone that they were in. But Adric did not know that. Ultimately, Adric had failed at breaking the Cybermen's codes, and the ship crash landed on Earth, causing obviously the calamity event to destroy the dinosaurs, but in so doing, it killed Adric. The Doctor was unable to, because of the damage done to his TARDIS with trying to defeat the Cybermen, damage done to his TARDIS in the fight with the Cybermen, was unable to materialize the TARDIS on the freighter and save Adric. So they all watched helplessly as Adric died, and that story ended very tragically, with them crushed at the death of someone that both Dr. Tegan and Nyssa cared about very much, and it affected all three of them very much, and affected the Doctor all the way through the end of Peter Davison's era as a Doctor. Well, that sort of ends the story. I encourage you to watch all of the classic stories of Doctor Who. You can get a lot of them from various things like Netflix and stuff like that. They're on DVD if you want to rent them or buy them. But I encourage all Doctor Who fans, if they haven't seen them, to definitely see the classic series. And of course see the 10 that I listed as my favorites. Those are my personal favorites. I guess other fans might have their own set of personal favorites. But I think I need to end this blog, because this blog is probably the longest one I've done to date, even longer than the last one. So I do appreciate your patience and your time for looking at this video, especially if you made it this far. I really appreciate you looking at this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative and very insightful, and learning about the classic series of Doctor Who and my favorite stories and why they're my favorite stories. And if you like the material that I talked about today, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to my channel so you'll get all the latest updates. Hopefully, I don't know if later in the future my blogs will be this long. I should try to make them a little shorter. But this one I went a little out of the way to make super long, to go through my list of the best 10 classic Doctor Who stories. So again, I want to thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you like the material. And I want to bid everyone a good day, and may the Force be with you.